Hello and welcome to Attacking Chess with GM Maxim Dlugy. I'm here to help you take a look at how to play attacking chess well, how to find combinations that lead to improvement of your attacking chances, how to avoid pitfalls in going ahead with your attack, and how to find the reasons for why your attack should be launched. And we'll do that by looking at a couple of my own games and games of the famous world champion Mikhail Tal, who was arguably the best attacking chess player that ever lived, basically living for an attack, living to create attacking chances out of nowhere. Let's take a look at his game against the young, at the time, Bobby Fischer. This was played in 1959 in the Candidates Tournament. Clearly, Bobby Fischer wasn't at his best at that point. He was still a teenager, but already a candidate for the world champion, so a strong player nevertheless. So let's take a look. This was King's Indian defense. The game started with d4. Knight f6, Tal played c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, castles, and knight f3. This is the classical variation of the King's Indian defense, popularized at that time by Tigran Petrosian playing white. He played it with the idea of developing his bishop to g5, as we'll see. This will happen in short order. And of course, this was Bobby's main opening at the time, the King's Indian defense. And so this was a very uncompromising struggle. Let's see how the game goes from here on. Black played d5, and Tal played d5. Now, current theory prefers something like castles or bishop e3, with the idea of waiting to lock up the center. But Black has his own counter chances in this case. So locking up the center is obviously a very important variation. And let's see how Black handles it from here. So after d5, Black plays knight bd7. This is one of the main lines. Currently, Black also tries moves like a5, and other moves are played as well. But knight bd7 is quite an important move in this position. And White plays bishop g5. And Black plays h6, which is an important move to force White to decide where to move his bishop. And White plays bishop h4. So this is an important moment for the opening specialists here. Black basically has a couple of main ideas how to proceed. One of these ideas is to play g5, bishop g3, knight h5, and later take the bishop on g3. White usually plays something like h4, and after g4, knight h2, knight takes g3, f takes g3. Black plays h5, locking up the king side. And of course, this is a very complicated position. For example, after castles, there was a famous game between Vladimir Kramnik as white and Garry Kasparov as black from the 1994 Linares tournament, which Kramnik won as white. And of course, the position is very far from clear, but we can see that certainly even many years ago, this was still a possibility that could be considered by both sides. So Anyway, in this position, after bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, black, Bobby Fischer, with playing black, decides to play a very simple move. He plays a6. Now, the idea of the move a6 is to, at some point, prepare the move b5, especially when white's pawn could become vulnerable, as black can always play g5 at some point. Of course, b5 is not a threat yet, but it's quite an interesting move, and it was played by many players after that. Some other moves that black can play, that the black is preparing at this point, is to play queen e8, for example, and then knight b5 would not be possible. This is another point for the move a6, basically to stop the move knight b5. So it's a preparatory move. At some point maybe black can get in b5, but certainly he will stop white from playing knight b5. So Mikhail Tal continues with his plan. After a6 he simply castles, and black plays queen a8, the move that he prepared with his last move, a7, a6. So now clearly black wants to move his knight to h5 and later use that square to maybe come into f4 or to prepare the move f5 himself. So white plays knight d2, a move that simply stops black from playing his knight to h5. In this position, black continues to prepare f5 and plays knight h7, and white simply plays b4 with the idea of eventually starting an attack, some attacking ideas on the queen side. After playing, for example, knight b3, he would be prepared to play c5 and create some activity on the queen side, which would be quite worrying for black if he does nothing. So black needs to very quickly figure out how to improve his position, and simple ways don't quite work. For example, black plays f5 now, which is the move that he seemed to be preparing with his last move, knight h7. White simply takes on e5 or on f5, and unfortunately for black, he cannot recapture with the pawn because of this amazing move, bishop h5, which all of a sudden traps the queen, since the two bishops are taking over the whole board, and black would have to give up the rook, the exchange, by playing rook f7, which of course isn't very good for black. So of course, if black plays rook takes f5, then after, for example, knight e4, this square becomes the base for all of white's pieces. All of white's pieces can go through that square and create attacking chances against black's king. So f5, black's not ready for. And some other possibilities, for example, playing knight g5, white would simply continue with his build-up in the center with knight b3, for example, and after f5, even a move like queen c2, basically black's knight would be in the way, because black wants to play f4, and after f3 start moving the pawns up the board with g5, etc. But the knight would have to first retreat, losing precious time, and of course white would be very quick to attack on the queen side. So knight g5 proved to be insufficient for black in an earlier game, and in this position Bobby Fischer chooses this interesting move, bishop f6. Basically he's saying, well, since my bishop is locked up and is not able to control the long diagonal, I'll exchange it off, and white will have one less defender on the king side, and I hope to launch an attack even without my dark squared bishop. So this is an interesting idea, and clearly prepared by Fischer for this game. So Tal also was knowledgeable about this line, as he claims in his analysis, and he simply takes the bishop. Black recaptures back with the knight on h7 because he wants to control the square c5 with the other knight, and white proceeds to create the threat c5. Black stops it with queen e7, clearly controlling c5 once again, and white is quick to bring in his queen to bear on the c5 square by playing queen d2, and after king h7, queen e3, again resuming the threat of c5. So as we can see, both sides are playing quite logical chess. White is trying to get in c5, and black is trying to stop it, and when he can't stop it anymore, he's looking for some other kind of counterplay. So black's counterplay obviously lies in bringing in the move f5 to bear on white's position, and so he plays knight g8, preparing f5. White doesn't consider this to be a major issue and continues with his plan, plays c5. Bobby Fischer plays f5, and this is white's reaction. Pawn takes pawn. As we looked at before, the pawn structure after rook takes f5 would not be good for black, because after, say, bishop d3, followed by knight e4, he would be very, very active, and black's king would eventually land in trouble. So black takes with the pawn on f5. So in this position, of course, it's very good for white that the dark-squared bishops are actually off the board, because with the dark-squared bishops on the board, it would be very difficult for white to open up the position, because the dark-squared bishop would be controlling a lot of squares. But as things stand, white is easily able to open the position now. So he plays f4, trying to create more tension on the board. Now all kinds of possible lines of attack are available to white, and black has to be very careful so as not to let something go through, something dangerous go through. So of course, at this point, black doesn't have that many options, because, for example, if he plays e4 to create this strong passed pawn, white will at some point, and maybe even now, play a move like g4, and after this pawn goes off the board, the pawn on e4 will become extremely weak. So whether this is the right move right now, or it makes sense to actually prepare this a little bit by maybe moving the king to h1 first, is another question. But certainly it's clear that without dark-squared bishops, e4 is strategically a mistake. I suggest you look at the positions resulting from that move and play them over on the board and see how you feel playing black. Pretty soon you'll see that black's position is quite dangerous. So Bobby, of course, is a great dynamic player, and he realizes that his chances lie in unbalanced pawn structures, not static ones. So he plays the right move in this position. Pawn takes pawn. Of course, his queen is defended by the knight, so white will have to figure out how to play this position with the queens on, because actually exchanging queens, for example, queen takes queen, knight takes queen, rook takes pawn, would not give white any serious advantage. Black would simply play knight e5, and the knight would be extremely strong. Black's other knight would be coming to g6 in short order, and after pawn goes to f4, this bishop would come out to f5. So black would be really very quickly developing his pieces, and that's not something that Tal wanted to allow. So instead of exchanging queens, he simply plays queen takes pawn. Now, the idea that Tal had with this move is that if black plays pawn takes pawn, now the pawn on c7 would be hanging. And he considered that the pawn on c7, once it goes off the board, would create this passed d pawn, which would be quite dangerous, and black's position would be worse. Well, let's see what happens. Now, black, of course, could refrain from taking the pawn on c5 and play a move like knight e5, which looks quite nice, but the game may continue something like rook e1 to bring in the piece, the important rooks to the center. Black would need to continue developing with something like bishop d7, and for example knight d4, bringing more pieces to bear on black's king side. Queen f7 to get out of the spin and free the knight. Queen d2, opening up the rook for all kinds of interesting tactics. Knight e7, and now bishop d1, mobilizing the bishop on the right diagonal. Queen g7, sidestepping from the spin of the rook. Bishop c2, rook e8, knight e2. Again, the pawn on f5 is hanging, so black's knight can't actually take the pawn on d5. Knight c4, queen d3, knight e5, queen d1, knight g4, knight, or maybe even queen g4 makes sense to try to stop white from continuing to attack the f pawn. And for example, knight f4, queen takes d1, rook takes d1, rook f6, and black, as you can see, is still in the game, although the f5 pawn continues to be weak, and it may well be that white is quite a bit better after a move like knight e6, for example. So this is the way the game could have continued had black played knight e5, and I think Bobby sensed that he could be quite a bit worse if he simply continues this sort of positional way without creating actual dynamic play as black. So he plays pawn takes pawn. He goes basically inviting Tal to do his worst, but he calculated the position and he feels that he has significant counter chances here. It's interesting that instead of taking the pawn on c5, which would actually, on c7, for example, queen takes 7, which would allow pawn takes pawn, hitting the knight and the bishop on e2, clearly this was what Bobby Fischer thought about as he played his move. White, Mikhail Tal, simply plays a very strong attacking move, bishop d3, eyeing the pawn on f5, which of course he threatens to take with check. And clearly this was the move that should have been analyzed by Bobby Fischer. And in this position, Bobby plays c takes b4, basically inviting further attack from Mikhail Tal. Now, there was another interesting move that he could play here, and a move that was probably a better move that he played, and that was queen g7, attacking the knight on c3 and shielding his king by adding another piece close to himself. And after queen g7, actually it's not clear if white actually has an advantage, because if you look at some of these lines, for example, obviously bishop takes pawn check makes a lot of sense, but after king h8, the knight has to find a good square, and the problem is that, for example, if white goes knight e2, black has this amazing move c4 that creates counter chances, because if black now takes queen takes pawn, if white takes queen takes pawn, black can play knight to c4, and for example after queen e4, bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop, rook takes rook, queen takes rook knight e7. Black simply captures the pawn on d5, restoring material equality, but actually his knights would stand quite more active than white knights, and so he would have a great position, a fine position, in fact. After c4, if white, for example, plays, let's see, knight a5, attacking the pawn on c4, black can simply play knight e7, counterattacking the bishop. And after, say, knight g3, knight b6, he would not only protect the pawn on c4, but also create the spin on the bishop on f5, which would result in a close to winning position for black, I think. I think white would really have to get into some tactics to save himself here, if at all possible. So probably knight e2 is not the right move, and white should play something like, let's see, white should play something like queen d2, probably, getting out of this pin. But again, black has counter chances. So, for example, queen d2, let's see, black can play, for example, knight e5, forcing the exchange of these bishops, and after, say, bishop takes c8, rook a c8, black actually threatens knight f3 check. So, of course, white still has to do something with these pawns on c5, otherwise black will take more pawns. So a sample line may run pawn takes pawn, knight f3 check, winning the exchange, rook takes knight, rook takes rook, and knight d4. Of course, actually, if black retreats the rook now, he may be in trouble, because the white knights, for example, after knight e6, and the rook comes in to aid in the attack, could create serious attacking chances. But black has a safety move. Rook takes knight, queen takes rook, and simply rook d8, attacking the pawn on d5. And because black's knight can add in this endeavor as well, and white's rook is hanging on a1 should both of white's pieces move away, black will actually recapture the pawn and equalize the position. So, for example, rook c1, rook takes d5, knight e6, queen takes queen, rook takes queen, rook d1 check, king f2, rook d2 check, king f3 to protect the pawn on g2, rook takes a2, knight takes c7, and simply move like rook b2 will eventually lead to a draw. I mean, white will probably be able to capture both a and b pawns for the price of the c pawn, but it will not be enough, because the 2-on-1 advantage on the king side will not prove to be decisive in a rook and knight ending. So this is a sample line, of course, but it shows you the defensive resources that black has in this position. Again, it's hard to find a move like queen g7. It's hard to evaluate whether that's weaker or stronger than the move that Bobby actually played. And clearly the move that Fischer played isn't as bad as probably Mikhail Tal thought during the game and when he was commenting on it later on. Because I looked at the commentaries and I think I found some improvements for black. Let's see. So in this position, black played pawn takes pawn. Oh, of course, this is the most testing move, because at this point black is ahead 2 pawns. Of course, the pawn on f5 will soon be gone. But clearly this move invites a lot of attack from the attacking genius of Mikhail Tal. So, of course, Bobby Fischer calculated variations very well, even when he was 15, 16 years old. But in these sort of positions, you cannot afford to make a single mistake, especially against very strong players. So queen g7 was probably, in my opinion, a safe alternative. And of course, white plays another attacking move, rook a to e1. And this was really the testing move. And in this position, black really had to figure out the best continuation. And the move that Bobby Fischer played actually gives him a very bad position, although it's not a move that looks so bad. So one of the ways that you defend in positions where your opponent seems to be attacking with every move and bringing in pieces to bear on your king is by hooking up with your opponent's strongest attacking piece. In this case, by hooking up, I mean attacking that piece. And of course, what I mean is that black needs to attack white's queen as quickly as possible. Failing to do that will give white many more options, many more attacking options, and some of them quite possibly will lead to a winning position. So in this position, the only right move for black was queen d6, attacking white's queen. Now, after queen d6, as it actually turns out, it's not clear that white has sufficient resources to win. So a sample line that I looked at is bishop takes pawn check, king h8, queen d4 check. But now black again tries to attack white's attacking pieces. So in this case, it's the right move is knight df6, hooking up to the bishop on f5, and of course the knight on c3 has long been hanging. And sample line, bishop takes c8, rook a c8, and now rook e6 could actually be met by simply queen d8, because on knight e4 black can play queen takes d5. So if white plays knight e4 immediately after queen takes d5, he has this move queen takes b4, but black continues to force exchanges by playing knight rook c to e8, and after knight f6 he has this amazing move rook takes rook. This is probably this is easily missed, obviously, but clearly in this position, if white takes the queen on d5, he'll be mated on f1. This position is very interesting, but I think at the end of the game, at the end of it, it's still quite drawish. If white takes the rook on e1, black will recapture the knight on f6 and still remain a pawn up, so whatever white has can only be referred to as initiative for a pawn. The most testing line, of course, is queen takes rook, and after rook takes rook, king takes rook, we get this very, very interesting position where basically at the end of it, black will take the knight on f6. He can do it immediately or not, but he can actually do it when white's king is already on a4, which maybe creates more chances for a draw. In my opinion, this position is drawn. I'll just give you a sample line which I looked at, and I think it's quite a drawn position. But let's take a look. King e2, queen b5 check, king d2, queen g5 check. Black can take the knight at will. So first he tries to force the white's king to the most inappropriate square. Queen e5, king b4, queen f4 check, king a3, and only now queen takes knight. Queen takes queen, knight takes queen, and we'll see that this is not actually as simple as it looks. White plays knight c5, attacking both pawns on b7, and the pawn moves to the pawn on a6, b6, knight a6, and now knight d5. So we can see that if white's king was, for example, on say d3, after king d4, black would be in a problematic situation. But white's king is on a3, so it takes a while for it to get active. King a4, for example, c6, knight b8, c5, king b5, king g7, knight d7, king f7, a4, king e6, knight takes b6, knight takes b6, and now a5. This was the whole point of white's plan. Now, if black moves the knight, white will push. Well, if black does not protect the c pawn, of course, if black plays knight d7 after a6, white simply queens the pawn. So if black plays, let's say, knight d5, then after king takes c5, white's two passed pawns, basically the pawn on the potential pawn on the king side and the pawn on the queen side, will create some chances for him to win. But the simplest way for black to draw is to simply c4, ab, c3, b7, c2, queen, queen, and all of a sudden we can see that the queen and the pawn are on one diagonal. So the best that white can hope for is to simply check black's queen, king for as long as he wants. But that's not going to give him serious winning chances. Clearly the position is extremely drawish. So this was, of course, a very, very long variation. But the idea of this is just to show you that black has sufficient counter chances here if he chose the right move. And of course, at this position, making that choice was extremely difficult. Clearly, Bobby had to figure out that a few moves down the line, for example, when white's rook could come to e6, it wasn't as dangerous as it seemed. So instead of this, Fischer thought that it's very important to attack the knight on c3 with his queen and played the move queen f6, which actually turns out to be the losing move. White plays rook e6, and black continues with his plan, which is actually will prove to be wrong. He plays queen takes c3. We'll see why that loses shortly, but I just wanted to show you another line which black should have opted for at this point, and that's the move queen g7. Again, as I said, if you keep your queen close to your king, sometimes that by itself is enough to shield you from enemy fire for quite some time. So the main line here would run bishop takes pawn, king h8, and of course white would take the pawn on b4, and the position is quite bad. Although the material is even, white is clearly very, very active. But still, even here, black has some chances. For example, he has this amazing move a5, which actually enables some of these pieces that he has to come into play. And the best that white has at this point is simply to exchange queens and play queen d4. Now, after queen d4, black is actually worse, clearly worse, because after queen takes d4, knight takes d4, really white's very active pieces will create very good winning chances. So, for example, knight b6, rook g6, bishop takes bishop, knight takes bishop, attacking the pawn on h6, and after, let's say, rook a d8, knight h6, knight takes h6, rook h6, king g7, rook h5, white protects the pawn on d5 and remains a pawn up. Of course, the two connected passed pawn will most likely win the game. But this was clearly a better chance and a better way to continue this position, because what happened was simply untenable. After queen takes c3, Tal took on f5. It's clear that king h8 is not playable because of rook takes pawn check, knight takes rook, queen takes knight, king g8, queen h7, mate. So black has to play rook takes bishop, queen takes rook happened in the game, king h8, and now it turns out that black's queen simply can't stand on this line of attack. White plays rook f3. Maybe this move was missed by Bobby, who thought that his two minor pieces compensate for the rook and that he can defend this position. But White now lifted the rook, so it can be used to attack black's king further. Black plays queen b2 to at least stay in the vicinity of trying to check white's king. But as you can see, all the squares where black's queen can actually check are completely controlled by white's army, right? The knight controls the a1 and c1 squares, and the queen controls the b1 square. So it's a really optical illusion that black is threatening some sort of check. Even the d4 square is controlled by white's knight. So white is free to attack, and of course that's exactly what he does. He plays rook e8, and since black's queen cannot really improve in this position, and white already threatens linear checkmates such as rook takes g8, queen f7 check, queen e8 check, followed by rook f7 check. Black needs an immediate reaction to survive the mates. None of really black's pieces can help or move except for playing something like knight df6, which is exactly what black does. But after queen takes f6, queen takes queen, rook takes queen, of course white is already exchanged up, already winning simply by virtue of having more pieces. But not only that, black's problem is that the pin on the bishop on c8 will also cause additional material loss. And after king g7, rook f to f8, knight e7, it was a cute trick that Bobby tried, the idea being that if white takes the knight, then black takes the rook. But of course, there's no need to take anything, because white can simply play knight a5, and black is in zugzwang, pretty much. Moves are running out, he plays h5, h4, rook b8, knight c4, and again forces black to make some moves, because now white's threatening d6 as well, b5 to try to stop b6, and simply knight e5. And now, besides everything else, there's an additional threat of rook f7 check. So clearly this position cannot be held any longer, because black loses more material, and black resigned. So as we saw, this was quite a simple looking game, where it seems that Tal just started by proving that that if black trades off the dark squared bishops, the pawn structure, the weak pawn on f5, will be sufficient to launch a very serious attack or to get a very good endgame. But in fact, when we looked at this closer, we saw that it wasn't as simple as that. In fact, black had a lot of counter chances and had a couple of ways that he could equalize, but it was all based on extremely complicated tactics that in a dynamic position like this, where basically it's a question of where and how each piece is going to be positioned, very important to find those tactics. Otherwise, you simply lose, even if you are Bobby Fischer.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damien for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.